LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out about 36 of the weekend's best clips for what should be a great show for you tonight, I think. As usual, my clips come mostly from the Sunday morning news analysis shows on the Big Five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, and I'll also have the usual political comedy clips from Friday night's Real Time with Bill Maher. Saturday Night Live is actually having their big 40th anniversary tonight, but it was a repeat. I think it was the very first Saturday Night Live episode from 1975 or something on Saturday. But for the topics I'm covering, you can see those listed down in the video description. And if you're watching this as a recorded show, you should see time indexes down there to skip to whatever topics most interest you. Tonight's topics include racism in the criminal justice system, especially regarding FBI Director James Comey's comments this week. Then I'll have several clips on the attacks over the weekend in Copenhagen, Denmark, on a free speech forum in a synagogue. Then I think the most clips of any topic is going to be on the continuing conflict with ISIS in Iraq and Syria, and the U.S. Congress considering this authorization for use of military force that President Obama proposed this last week. I'll also have a quick clip on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu planning to speak to the Republican Congress without consulting the Obama administration. I'll have another quick clip on the split in the Republican Party on not funding the Department of Homeland Security to protest Obama's immigration order. I'll have several clips on this latest gay marriage conflict between the federal court and Alabama Supreme Court Justice Roy Moore. I'll have a couple more clips on what Jon Stewart leaving and Brian Williams getting suspended say about the media, and a quick update at the end on the VA scandal. But first, I guess, is kind of my host privilege because I'm an old X-Files fan. I want to start with a clip of David Duchovny answering a question about whether they're going to be new episodes of The X-Files, as some have reported. And there's also a little on conspiracy theories when he talked to Bill Maher on his Overtime segment which is available in whole, free on YouTube at a link you can see down in the video description. And here's the clip I want to show you with David Duchovny.
Dave, what can you tell us about the rumors of an X-Files reboot?
From that to that?
Yeah, these are people's questions that they write in.
I thought
These are random. These are.
I think it looks good. I think it looks good. Very good.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What a reboot of as a TV show?
As a limited run television series.
Oh, a limited run.
Yeah, limited.
How many shows would it be?
I don't know exactly, but it'd be limited. Be limited.
Less than infinite.
So after all these years, that shit is still out there.
Yeah.
Oh, fuck,
I'm
man.
just as surprised as you.
It's just like political correctness. We thought we got rid of it in the 90s.
I also do not believe
back.
in conspiracies like you.
Yeah.
I do not. I believe it's very difficult for two people to keep a secret from a third person.
I agree.
Let alone killing Kennedy. You know? So
yeah.
it's not going to happen. But
Somebody-
people love a conspiracy.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to new X-File episodes. It'll be interesting to see if it holds up in the 2015, back from the 90s, I guess. But I also definitely agree with David Duchovny about conspiracy theories because it's really difficult, like you said, for even a couple people to keep a secret, never mind all those, how many, I don't know, like thousands, hundreds at least, who would have to remain quiet for something like the JFK assassination or a 9/11 conspiracy. But I guess speaking of conspiracies, sort of like conspiracies, I also wanted to get to the issue of racism in the criminal justice system, which is an especially appropriate issue because after some copyright and other delays, I'm finally going to be able to publicly release my video. Here's an announcement. My video that's titled Cops, Justice System, Racist, Classist, or Both. and that's going to be released on Thursday morning, though my patrons on Patreon have access to a draft of the version right now. So if you're not a patron, you can sign up using a link right down below the video in the video description, even just pledging $1, which you don't even have to pay till the beginning of March. And you can give me feedback as I try to shorten that video down from its current 21.5 minutes. But so anyway, racism in the criminal justice system was in the news because of comments that FBI Director James Comey made that I'll show first as described back on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, that also includes a comment from Baratondi Thurston over in this clip.
Move on to James Comey. He is the head of the FBI. Yeah. I've always been a fan of him since 2000. Well, I guess we found out about it in 2006. But he was the guy in 2004 when Bush tried to pull a fast one with wiretapping. Mm-hmm. And he's a Republican, like you, Tom, one of the good ones.
It's a low bar, Bill, for you.
No. But I like him. I have always liked him, and he's the head of the FBI now, and he didn't have to speak out on race. No. That's not his job, but he chose to this week. And he basically said something which, to a lot of people, is a little counterintuitive, which is basically you can have racism without racists. He said, everyone makes judgments based on race. I mean, he's the top cop. So he was talking about police and all that issue, that stuff we got into, that conversation about race that we're kind of not having now. And he's saying, no, let's have it. And here's a quote. He said, police officers work in environments where a hugely disproportionate percentage of street crime is committed by young men of color. That's when the Fox News crowd applauded. And then he said, a mental shortcut becomes irresistible. The two young black men on one side of the street look like so many others the officer has locked up. See, the cops are not racist, he's saying, but we're only human beings, and this is the country we live in. I got to commend him. I thought
Bill, this was widely heralded by both sides when you look at it. Unlike some of the other statements, people have tried to wade into this. Both sides, I think, gave him a wide acclaim on this.
It's such a rare moment to have a high-ranking public white male official acknowledge the history of law enforcement and racism in the United States of America, to quote Avenue Q, a Broadway musical, where he said, we're all a little bit racist. That's not something top cops usually say out loud. And he also basically called for empathy and more data sharing. This was a good day. This is like an Ice Cube song at the end of this moment. I just played that on a very good day.
So, yeah, it is kind of funny that the director of the FBI talked about this Broadway musical song about everyone being a little bit racist. And I enjoyed that discussion of it on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. But one of the sad things was it wasn't covered very much on the rest of the corporate media. The only place they did a little coverage of it was over on CBS's Face the Nation. I think one other show they talked about it briefly in one of the panel discussions. But before I get to the CBS Face the Nation coverage, I actually want to show you a clip. I'm going to show you a couple clips from the actual James Comey speech. I put a link down in the video description. You can see the entire 22-minute speech, I think. But here's what James Comey said that they were talking about over on that panel from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. Here's the actual excerpt from the speech that you can see in this clip.
Something happens to people in law enforcement. Many of us develop different flavors of cynicism that we work hard to resist because they can be lazy mental shortcuts. For example, criminal suspects routinely lie about their guilt, and nearly everybody that we charge is guilty. That makes it easy for some folks in law enforcement to assume that everybody's lying and that no suspect, regardless of their race, could be innocent. Easy, but wrong. Likewise, police officers on patrol in our nation's cities often work in environments where a hugely disproportionate percentage of street crime is committed by young men of color. Something happens to people of goodwill working in that environment. After years of police work, officers often can't help but be influenced by the cynicism they feel. A mental shortcut becomes almost irresistible and maybe even rational by some lights. The two young black men on one side of the street look like so many others that officer has locked up. Two white men on the other side of the street, even in the same clothes, do not. The officer does not make the same association about the two white guys, whether that officer is white or black. And that drives different behavior. The officer turns towards one side of the street and not the other.
So, like they were saying on Real Time with Bill Maher, it is kind of remarkable that the white director of the FBI would make a statement like that and recognize some of the racist decisions that a lot of cops make out of cynicism and out of mental shortcuts. And if that's the only way that people can talk about racism without one side or the other getting all upset, maybe that's a good thing, I guess. And I also want to show, like I said, some clips from CBS's Face the Nation. First, here's one where Bob Schieffer was talking to Congressman John Lewis, who was one of the heroes of the civil rights movement. Later, I'm going to show him talking about his march across the Pettus Bridge in the Selma, Alabama in 1965, which is coming up on the 50th anniversary. But here's Bob Schieffer asking Congressman John Lewis about what James Comey said, and I'll talk about that a little more after you see here.
Let me talk to you about what I thought was a rather remarkable speech made by the FBI Director James Comey. He said there is a disconnect between law enforcement and minority communities, and he said all of us, black and white, carry various biases around with us. What do you think about what he said?
It's a profound statement, profound speech. And I think it took raw courage, not anything short of raw courage, for the director of the FBI to be able to say something like that. It is very encouraging to have this federal official. When you look back to the 50s and the 60s, when the FBI spied on Martin Luther King Jr., when the FBI was not doing the job that it should have been doing, that's hope. Give me hope.
And, on that last topic about what the FBI used to do in regards to race and regarding Martin Luther King, James Comey also said something kind of interesting about that in his speech that I didn't see people talking about as directly, but I want to show you what he said about the history of racism at the FBI and what he does to try to counteract that over in this clip.
There is a reason that I require all new agents and analysts to study the FBI's interaction with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and to visit his memorial in Washington as part of their training. And there is a reason I keep on my desk a copy of Attorney General Robert Kennedy's approval of J. Edgar Hoover's request to wiretap Dr. King. It is a single page. The entire application is 5 sentences long. It is without fact or substance and is predicated on the naked assertion that there is, quote, communist influence in the racial situation. The reason I do those things is to ensure that we remember our mistakes and that we learn from them.
So that's kind of more than just what Congressman John Lewis said about being hopeful about the other part of the speech. What FBI Director James Comey said there about what he keeps on his desk to remind him of flimsy requests for wiretaps, that also gives me a little hope about warrantless wiretapping, because James Comey during the Bush administration was one of the heroes of the almost death of Bush's warrantless wiretapping. It didn't actually die, but he was the one who refused to, when he was acting Attorney General, he refused to give his approval to the warrantless wiretapping, so that Bush and Alberto Gonzalez had to, not Bush, but Alberto Gonzalez had to go to the hospital bed of then Attorney General John Ashcroft, and Bill Maher kind of talked about that story. I've talked about that story before on my LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. I don't want to go into more of the details, but it does show sort of the courage of James Comey in a couple different places. That I guess he is a Republican, but He was talking there about the FBI's history of racism and Martin Luther King. I want to show another clip of John Lewis over on CBS's Face the Nation. He and Bob Schieffer were actually at the bridge that he tried to cross during like the aborted Selma March, and then that he was able to march across a few weeks later after LBJ brought in the National Guard to guard their march. And I'll talk about that a little more after you see this little piece of history reenacted or described with some archival footage on CBS's Face the Nation this morning here.
People down there.
We saw down below the state troopers, and behind the state troopers was the sheriff posse on horseback.
You have to disperse.
And we got to the bottom of the bridge.
See that they turn around and disperse.
And they came toward us, beating us with nightsticks, using tear gas and trampling us with horses.
You were right in the front. And
I was in the very front.
So you were among the first that was hit.
I was the first person to be hit, and I still have the scar on my forehead. And I was knocked down. My legs just went out from under me. I thought I was going to down this bridge. I said to myself, this is the last protest for me.
What happened? Do you remember anything after that?
I remember being back at the church. I don't even recall how I got back to the church, but apparently someone carried me back, and I guess I become conscious, and someone asked me to say something to the audience, and I stood up and said, I don't understand it, how President Johnson can send troops to Vietnam and cannot send troops to Selma, Alabama, to protect people who only desires to register to vote.
And then, in a matter of weeks, of course, he did send the troops, and you were able to make that march to Selma.
There is no cause for pride in what has happened in Selma. Their cause must be our cause, too.
Yeah, 2 weeks later, after President Johnson delivered that speech, we did make the march all the way from Selma to Montgomery. It was a sea of humanity marching on this highway.
And you did have people protecting you then, all the way?
All the way, people inspecting the bridges along the way, guarding the camps that night. It was our military. It was our military at its best.
So I thought that was kind of inspiring to hear that history. And actually, before I leave the topic of race, there was sort of a racist, although I know people don't think Islamophobia is racist, but I think in the more general term of bigotry, there was this incident in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I noticed I was watching what you were saying down in the comments section during the last few clips. I noticed here's a comment from NO8549, maybe too early to talk about atheist gunmen in North Carolina. Well, I was actually a little disappointed that there wasn't more talk about that on the shows. The only exception was over also on CBS's Face the Nation. They brought it up briefly. If you don't know, here's these 3 people were killed in North Carolina. Some people say it was a parking dispute. Some people say it was a hate crime. The alleged gunman is this new atheist who's like a follower of some of the anti-theist teachings of the, like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris. Not to blame, I'm not saying that any of those people are responsible for this killing or even that it is a hate crime. But I'm just saying I wish there had been more coverage of it on the Sunday morning shows. There was almost none. And I especially wish that Bill Maher, as a big leading atheist, had said something about it on his show on Friday. He didn't say anything about it at all on the entire show or the overtime segment. Nobody asked about it, I guess. So that was a little disappointing. And I put it in on the subject of race because they actually had an attorney from the NAACP talking about how this shooting has led some Muslim parents to give their kids a talk kind of like the talk that African American parents give their kids, which I'll talk about a little more. Oh, and then there's this kind of ridiculous comment at the end from this CBS legal correspondent that I'll talk about also after you see that.
We should be cautious. The Justice Department actually isn't investigating it as a hate crime. They're investigating the predicate of the killing to determine whether there should be a hate crimes investigation. So they're taking the slow steps of figuring this out. And I think, you know, Jeff is right. At the end of the day, there are 3 Muslims killed. I heard a Muslim young person say, you know, our parents now feel they have to have the talk with us that African American parents have with their children. That even if it evokes that feeling, it's a very serious moment. And so I think we'll see as the Justice Department goes through this investigation what really happened here. But I think there's enough there that we should be deeply concerned about the implications of this killing.
You know, and there was also in Alabama in the last week a Indian grandfather visiting his son who was studying in Huntsville was beaten, thrown down, and now is hospitalized. But of course, law enforcement there fired the officer. It was videotaped. So obviously these are affects people that across the board.
That last comment there was CBS legal correspondent Jan Crawford with that comment about how it affects these Muslims and this Indian grandfather, so it affects people across the board. I mean, I think that these kinds of incidents do affect a lot of different kinds of people, but I don't think these 3 Muslims and an Indian really get you across anything beyond maybe people of color, or I don't know exactly. But I want to move on to an incident that got a lot more coverage in the media than the Chapel Hill shooting in North Carolina, which was this shooting over the weekend in Copenhagen, Denmark. And apparently the shooter who shot up this free speech forum where there was one of the cartoonists who drew, I think he may be Swedish, but whose cartoons were in this Danish newspaper, and he was on this panel talking about free speech at a free speech forum when this someone came and started shooting the place up, and I think killed a police officer and one other person, and then also killed a security guard at a synagogue before the supposed gunman, alleged gunman, being shot by Danish police. Anyway, I'm going to show you a few different reports on this from the corporate media. I'm going to start with the one on NBC's Meet the Press from their reporter Richard Engel, who's actually reporting on this from Istanbul, but that's because he just came back from Iraq, as you'll see a little later in the show. But here he is talking about what happened in Denmark in this clip.
Denmark believe that this was a terrorist attack, and they are going to great lengths to say that Denmark is not at war with Islam, but is at war with radical Islam. So they seem to be linking it. And it is almost a mini Charlie Hebdo style attack, a mini attack like the one we saw in Paris. What happened was yesterday around 3:30, this gunman goes up to a cafe, opens fire with an automatic rifle. The gunman was wearing a mask, a heavy winter coat. He fires about 40 shots into the cafe windows. At the cafe at the time was a free speech event, and the keynote speaker at that event was Lars Vilks, a Swedish cartoonist who's been targeted for death by Al-Qaeda, who has drawn caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad as a dog in the past. So someone clearly that Al-Qaeda wanted to kill. Then the attacker got away. He was on the run for several hours as Danish police were looking for him. Around 1 o'clock in the morning, overnight, he opens fire, not surprisingly, at a synagogue. Again, a Jewish target, very similar to the Charlie Hebdo attacks. He killed a guard at the synagogue. And then in the early hours overnight, around 4:50 in the morning, police confronted the suspect. The suspect opened. Police returned fire, and they killed him.
All right. So yeah, that's the NBC version of what happened, and it's pretty similar to what I'm going to show you from ABC and CNN, but I want to contrast them a little bit. Here's the ABC report from their reporter Terry Moran, basically giving the same facts over in this clip.
It is Copenhagen's turn to reckon with the aftermath of terror. We are here at the site of the first of the attacks yesterday afternoon Right back there, you can see the bullet-riddled glass, the cafe where this began. Danish security had been on high alert, but this attack came without warning. Its apparent targets, however, were grimly familiar: a cartoonist and a synagogue.
For hours, this city was gripped by terror. It began here at around 4 o'clock Saturday afternoon at this Copenhagen cafe, the first target. A gunman opening fire, firing 40 rounds. Police on the scene firing back. Inside, a panel discussion on art, blasphemy, and freedom of expression. Listen as the horror unfolds.
Why do we still say but when we...
The host, Lars Vilks, he's a Swedish cartoonist, and he's on an al-Qaeda hit list for drawing the Prophet Muhammad. Vilks, whose bodyguards rushed him into the cafe's kitchen, survived. But a 55-year-old man attending the event was killed.
I'm not sure how many shots, but I'd say about 20 or 30 shots. And people panicked, of course, ran to the doors. Other people were hiding behind the tables they had turned over.
Police launched a nationwide manhunt, releasing this image of a suspect who fled in a stolen car. And then, just after midnight, another shooting spree. This one downtown near a synagogue. 3 people shot, 1 person killed, 2 police officers wounded, and the gunman fleeing on foot. A few hours later, a shootout not far away. Danish police apparently lying in wait for a suspect, and when he arrived, killing him in an exchange of gunfire. Authorities say they believe he was the gunman in both of the early shootings seen on this security video from last night, described as, quote, Arabic-looking, 25 to 30 years old, armed with a machine gun. All of this comes 5 weeks after jihadists struck the offices of the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo in Paris, killing 12 people there. Revenge, they said, for publishing cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad.
So yeah, that was the ABC report. I think it was a little bit slicker, had a little more impact in terms of the video they used, and it was the only one I think that said that he looked Arabic. This person who, last time I checked the news, hadn't been identified, but they were giving all sorts of information. I think they said he was 22, that he was born in Denmark, that he lived in this sort of gang area, and I think that gang area thing may be included in the CNN report I'm going to show you next from Nick Robertson. Although I'm a little disappointed, I've mentioned that since Candy Crowley left, CNN State of the Union, they do a 6 a.m. broadcast Pacific time and a 9 a.m. broadcast, and it used to be Candy Crowley would actually redo the broadcast live at 9 a.m., even though some of the content would be the same stuff that was recorded from the 6 a.m. In fact, most of it was the same stuff from 6 a.m., but she would always do some parts live again. They don't do that anymore. They had the guest host this time was Jim Acosta. Maybe when they get their permanent replacement for Candy Crowley, they'll start having some new live stuff in the 9 a.m. broadcast. But this report from Nick Robertson was not updated in those 3 hours, so it's still pretty much around the same as the ABC and the NBC reports I showed you, and here, this is the last report I'm going to show on what happened in Denmark in this clip.
And they have surveillance camera footage that shows the gunman coming back to this apartment between the attacks. They then waited for him. That's when he returned home at about 4:50 in the morning. They challenged him. He shot back at them. They shot at him, killing him. Now, what they say they've discovered is that when they shot him, he had pistols on him. What they know about the first attack was that it was an attack with an automatic weapon, possibly a machine pistol or a small machine gun. When they went into his apartment today, they've discovered that longer weapon that may be consistent with the weapon that was used in the first part of the attack. They've also discovered clothing in his apartment consistent with what they believe the first gunman was wearing. So there's a much higher degree of confidence from the police here now. The Deputy Prime Minister has also said the same thing. They believe they've got the man who was behind both these attacks. What they're concerned about now and why security remains high is because they don't know if there are other perpetrators out there, other actors who are ready to sort of do copycat type attacks or be inspired by this to do something, Jim.
And Nick.
Now, I saw CNN reporting later in the day that there were 2 other people arrested, and I kept trying to figure out at least in terms of video, what the details of that and how, if those people were like definitely related to these attacks somehow. But I couldn't confirm that, at least while I was working, putting all these clips together. I don't have that much time to do too much research, unfortunately. But I also want to show not another report from any of the corporate media, but I want to show from CBS's Face the Nation. They had on White House Chief of Staff Dennis McDonough, and I guess he was interviewed last night, not this morning, but already last night they knew about the first attack on the free speech forum, not the second attack on the synagogue and the person being killed. But here's what Dennis McDonough said last night about the first stage of the attack on Face the Nation, this broadcast this morning over here.
We've obviously made clear that we abhor this and will not let these kinds of attacks stand. We're scheduling a summit late in the week, a 3-day summit at the State Department on countering violent extremism, because we know that AQAP, Al-Qaeda on the Arabian Peninsula, has plans to do things like this around the world. So we got to make sure that we're staying one step ahead of them.
So that's all the White House had to say about it, at least as of last night, although I'm sure there will be more statements from the White House and more information about these additional arrests. And I actually don't have that much more information about the Copenhagen, Denmark attacks. The only other clip I want to play on that is actually from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. This was from Friday night before the attacks even happened. There was one sort of interesting moment, since it's a live show. I guess there was some kind of disturbance, and Bill Maher talked about how he was worried about his show being a target after the Charlie Hebdo attacks, and I thought this was kind of appropriate given what happened at this free speech forum in Denmark, although hopefully the United States isn't quite as vulnerable. But here's the brief moment when Bill Maher was scared, he was talking to this author, Robert Kenner, who is talking about people who are paid shills to deny climate change and stuff, and who came originally from the tobacco industry. And I'm not going to get into all the details, but you can see this slight disturbance gets this admission from Bill Maher over here.
This why, or one reason why 48% of Republicans in a recent poll said they would actually be more likely to vote for the candidate who would do something about global warming.
I think things are starting.
Trouble? Okay. Sorry.
That's okay.
We're a little nervous here since Charlie Hebdo.
Well, that 48% is that's a shocking number.
I never know when I'm going to have to kind of move quickly.
Right.
So I guess Bill Maher's a little bit nervous about his show based on the way he reacted to some disturbance, or I don't know exactly what was going on in his audience there. But I want to move from the attacks in Denmark, which seem to probably be related to radical Islam, although all the facts haven't come in, and I'm not going to depend just on that one reporter who said he was Arabic looking, although if you look at the pictures, his face is almost completely covered. So I mean, it's quite possible he's of Arabic descent or whatever. But I want to move on, like I said, to the subject of ISIS. And one thing that has made that front and center in the news this last week is President Obama's call for the Congress to basically declare war on ISIS, to authorize the use of military force. And that presents sort of a dilemma for Republicans that Bill Maher talked about in his monologue on Friday over in this clip.
Now, in other scary Islamist news, the President of the United States, President Obama, formally asked Congress this week to grant him authority to use military force against ISIS. And what a dilemma for the Republicans. You know, because if they vote for it, they're agreeing with Obama. But how can they say no to war? Come on. What to do? It's like offering a redneck fried poison. What? I mean, I'd call it a Sophie's choice, but Sophie just had to decide which one of her kids would live. This is agreeing with Obama.
So that's kind of funny, and I'm going to show some clips of Republicans trying to both agree with Obama and distance themselves from Obama on this AUMF. That's the Authorization for Use of Military Force. They call it an AUMF. And there are some, basically the Democrats are, or at least mostly Democrats are worried that the authorization is too broad, and then Republicans are worried that it's not broad enough, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But first I want to show some more general reports and talk about whether the strategy against ISIS, all these airstrikes, and what's going on with the Iraqi military and the militias and the Kurds, and then what's going on in Syria, whether all that's working or not. And I want to show first this is a long report from Martha Raddatz on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. She starts off sort of just talking to high-ranking military, which I've criticized her before for being a little too close to the military, but also pointed out the value of that she gets these great interviews and gets the inside story from top military members, which you'll see that at the beginning of this clip. And then Martha Raddatz did this thing that I haven't seen her do before, where she kind of like went undercover to talk to the local Jordanian Muslim population, both those who oppose ISIS and those who are in favor of it. And that's at the end of this. Like I said, I think this is about 3 minutes long, and it's definitely worth watching from This Week with George Stephanopoulos, Martha Raddatz, talking about the general situation with ISIS and with support and the people who are against ISIS in the Muslim world, or specifically in Jordan, in this clip.
Striking from the air, the U.S. and its allies stepping up the fight against ISIS, pounding targets across Iraq and Syria with growing ferocity. Now, the president looking to escalate even more. This week, asking Congress for more flexibility for American forces, which could soon include special forces on the ground.
Now, make no mistake, this is a difficult mission, and it will remain difficult for some time. It's going to take time to dislodge these terrorists.
Terrorists who have flooded into Syria and Iraq from around the world, including just across the Jordan-Iraq border, where ISIS flourishes. This border is where we brought the former deputy head of Central Command, Admiral Robert Harward, who spent his career tracking the entire region and fighting on the ground as a Navy SEAL.
It looks like the moonscape here, but pretty easy to cross in.
Sure. You can walk, ride your camel, drive a car, ride a motorcycle. It's very simple to cross these areas of terrain.
And just disappear.
At any time you want, day or night.
And driving along the border, we saw Jordanian tanks and forces deployed as fears grow that ISIS fighters could bring the battle to Jordan.
The problem, of course, is not only ISIS fighters coming this way, but fighters who want to go be with ISIS going the other way.
That same fear on Jordan's northern border with Syria, where ABC's Alex Marquardt traveled.
As Jordan steps up their fight against ISIS, their jets screaming across the border, on the ground, young Jordanian men from tough, poorer towns can easily cross the border into Syria to join ISIS.
After that shocking execution of the Jordanian pilot burned alive, much of the Arab and Muslim world rallied against ISIS, known in Arabic as Daesh.
Would you go fight in Syria?
If the Daesh killed our brother in Syria, yes, I will go to there.
But that execution and the coalition airstrikes have also galvanized legions of ISIS supporters. In a war situation for us, you have to understand it's an eye for an eye, this man told me when we visited the southern Jordanian city of Man, which has become fertile ground for ISIS and al-Qaeda.
The people here in Man say at least 40 young men from this town have been killed in Syria, of the hundreds who've gone to fight there.
Religious extremism is growing in Man, an impoverished city with 25% unemployment, where many are angry and disenchanted with the king. Young men like those we met outside a mosque are also inspired to fight after watching thousands of their fellow Muslims die in Syria's 4-year-long war.
The boys, would you go fight in Syria? And why?
What we watch on TV they give us the motivation to go and fight in Syria.
What is that motivates you to want to go into Syria and fight?
Syrians are our brothers, and when you see how they are being killed, you just have the motivation to go and fight.
Many of those who answered the call to jihad from Jordan have been encouraged by this man, Abu Sayyaf, a well-known radical cleric previously imprisoned for leading anti-government protests. In an interview at his home, where as a woman I was told not to sit near him or be photographed with him, he said ISIS made a mistake by burning the pilot alive, but defended sending extremist fighters to Syria. Tell us why you want to send fighters to Syria.
When the Syrian people call upon all Muslims to support them, we in the Salafi Jihadi movement answered this call, and this is for the sake of God that we went to fight in Syria.
A fight, he said, that men and women are willing to face prison for or death.
Well, like I said, that was an extended clip, but I thought that was an awesome report from Martha Raddatz of ABC. Definitely worth showing. I think it went almost to around 4 minutes there, but especially that stuff at the end where she talked to the local Jordanians, both those who oppose ISIS and those who are supporters, and that, what was his name, Abu Sayyaf, the cleric there, who opposed the burning of the Jordanian pilot, but still was sending fighters to help ISIS. That was definitely worth watching, and was very informative. I thought. You can let me know what you think down in the comments section. And actually, I want to compare that to another report. This is much shorter, from Richard Engel over on NBC, NBC's Meet the Press. I mentioned that he was in Istanbul talking about what happened in Denmark. Oh, actually, before I get to that, I should show you one of the comments I saw down in the comments section from one of my European viewers. Here we go. Yeah, this is from Rune Munch Peterson. Said that there's this persistent narrative that Europe's being overrun by Muslims, and that the fall to Ismail is imminent, but actually saying that he's someone who lives there, and Denmark is below 10% of Muslims, and there isn't such a threat. So that's at least one view from Europe on that. I wanted to show from the comment section, but that's kind of the topic, the Denmark topic that I left behind. Now back on the ISIS topic, since I just wanted to show that comment because I had the opportunity to read through all the, I think, over 80 people watching live, and I appreciate all of you who are commenting and keeping me company while I show you these clips I picked out. When I have a 4-minute clip like that one from Martha Raddatz, it gives me a chance to catch up on what all of you are saying, since I've watched the clip 2 or 3 times already. But like I said, the next report I want to show is from NBC's Richard Engel, who was in Istanbul because he just came back from Iraq, and he said he was really depressed and did not have many positive things to say about how the fight against ISIS is going, at least in terms of our local allies providing ground troops, as you can see over, let me make sure I get this right, over in this clip.
I was incredibly depressed, frankly. I knew that Iraq was in bad shape. It was even worse than I thought. ISIS is a huge problem in Iraq, in Syria, but unless you confront these much bigger issues, the issue of, will Kurdistan be an independent state? What happens to Sunni areas? Will the government in Baghdad continue to be run by Shiite militias? What happens with Hezbollah? What happens with Assad? Unless you address these bigger issues, ISIS is still going to be there. I was completely discouraged by what I saw. The Iraqi army has been described as pathetic, little more than a coalition of militias. So I got no indication that things are going well.
So things are not going well, at least with the ground troops. I mean, the airstrikes and the coalition of surrounding Arab nations providing some of those airstrikes has some positive aspects to it. But I guess the other than the Kurds, there aren't a lot of really effective ground forces that were either amongst the Iraqi military. You know, I showed a clip was it last week or the week before, about how some of the most effective non-Kurdish forces were these Badr brigades, or I can't remember, the forces that are these Shia militias that have also engaged in these atrocities that make them a really bad bet for U.S. foreign policy, but that's the best we have at this point, I guess. And then on the subject of whether we're losing our fight against ISIS, that was also a question that Bob Schieffer asked Republican Senator Bob Corker over on Face the Nation this morning, and I'll show you that answer over in this clip.
Are you at this point feeling that the United States and the West may be losing this fight with ISIS? Their numbers keep expanding. We hear about them, opening affiliates in other countries. This does not seem to be something that's going well from my point of view.
Well, look, it is metastasizing. The focus right now, Bob, as you know, is on Iraq and Syria, and yet they're in multiple other countries. Just this weekend, this is maybe a little bit of a stretch, but the leader of Nigeria tried to establish a relationship between ISIS and Boko Haram there. And so we have the incident that you just referred to earlier in Copenhagen. Not only are these groups able to hold territory like they're doing in Syria and Iraq, but they're also able to enlist people in countries where they aren't to take on terrorist activities like we're seeing. So this threat is very different, and that's why it is important for us to fully understand the threat, understand how we're going to go forward, and I think very important, because this is going to be going on for numbers of years. I think it is important for Congress to get behind an authorization, one that they feel is prudent, and obviously the President sent something over. That's a beginning point. It's now a legislative vehicle. We'll decide how it should go forth, but this is something that's going to take a long commitment by all of those in the free world to undermine what ISIS is doing.
So, yeah, that was the Republican Senator Bob Corker, and you notice at the end there he made a reference to the authorization for use of military force, and that's the big point of contention at this, or in this last week, when President Obama called for the Congress to basically declare war on ISIS, and I'm going to show several clips on that. First, starting with this report from Jonathan Karl on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, focusing on the AUMF issue over here.
Today, my administration submitted a draft resolution to Congress to authorize the use of force against ISIL. Our coalition is on the offensive. ISIL is on the defensive, and ISIL is going to lose.
That was President Obama on Wednesday calling on Congress to vote to authorize the use of military force for the first time since 2002. And it might be the first time a president has asked for limits on his own military options. The authorization lasts for just 3 years, and it explicitly rules out, quote, enduring offensive ground combat operations. Some Republicans say that places too many limits on the military.
I'm not sure that the strategy that's been outlined will accomplish the mission the president says he wants to accomplish.
But some Democrats are critical too, saying it leaves too many options on the table.
That language is very broad. It would allow significant U.S. ground combat operations.
Let's take on the debate.
So yeah, that was the report from ABC's Jonathan Karl on the authorization for use of military force. And now I want to show sort of the split between the Republicans and the Democrats on this. Like I was saying, the Republicans think that what President Obama proposed to the Congress, Republicans think it's not broad enough. It ties the executive too much and doesn't put forth a strategy to win or whatever. And then Democrats think that the authority that he's proposed is too broad. And that's kind of exemplified in this next clip, also from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Jonathan Karl had on a Republican and a Democrat. The Democrat is Adam Schiff, the Republican is Adam Kinzinger, and basically asked them both to talk about this split between the Democrats and the Republicans, whether it's too broad or not broad enough, the authority for authorization of use of military force as you can see over in this clip.
Resolution. This is a fascinating debate because, first of all, Adam Schiff, you are a Democrat. You want to give the president less options. You want to tie his hands a little bit more. You, Congressman Kinzinger, you are a Republican. You want to give him more options. So what I want to ask both of you, though, looking at this debate, what is at stake if Congress takes this up and fails to pass this resolution? What does it say to the rest of the world?
Well, it says the Congress can't get its act together, for one thing, and it also says to future presidents that Congress is basically an historical anachronism in terms of its power to declare war, that we're no longer relevant in that debate. We should have never taken 6 months to take this up. It is finally happening. I think it's very important that we find a way to get to yes on an authorization. But I also think it's very important that we not write another blank check. We did that 14 years ago with the 2001 authorization, and that authorization continues in force under the president's proposal, and that's very worrying to a lot of Democrats because it means that when the new one expires, the next president can simply rely on this old authorization and say that gives me the authority to go after whoever I want, wherever I want, in any way I want.
But Congressman Kinzinger, you say that this ties the president's hands.
I think it ties the president's hands. It also is making Congress, in essence, part of the president's limited strategy. The president, I've been critical to say he needs, more airstrikes, probably embed some special operations on the ground to push back ISIS. But at the end of the day, you have to say this. Look, the existence of ISIS is the worst thing, or the existence of American ground combat operations is the worst thing. And what his draft resolution would do is say we need to destroy ISIS to a point, unless it takes enduring offensive operations, whatever that means, then in which case we just don't have the authority to do it. The job of Congress, and Adam said it, is to declare war. It's not to be commander-in-chief. And this authorization, as the president put out, would be, in essence, Congress being commander-in-chief and making strategic decisions for it.
So between the Democratic member of Congress there, Adam Schiff, and the Republican member of Congress, Adam Kinzinger, you can kind of see this split. It's not complete between Democrats and Republicans, but Democrats seem to want a narrower authority, and Republicans want a broader authority for the authorization of use of military force. And over on CBS's Face the Nation, Bob Schieffer asked the White House Chief of Staff, Dennis McDonough, about this split and whether it was going to be a problem. And here's how the White House answers that question in this clip.
About this? Let's talk about the president sending this resolution up to Congress. He sends a resolution asking Congress to join him, authorize him to fight ISIS. The Democrats say it goes too far. The Republicans say it doesn't go far enough. It looks like the whole thing could just blow up in his face and make this worse.
We've put together what we think is the likeliest outcome to get a strong bipartisan showing. So they're going to have hearings on it. They'll make some decisions for themselves. We've given them a good place to start. We'll see where they end. I will say this, though, Bob. What they shouldn't do this time is what they did in 2013 when they took a pass on this issue. It's very important in questions of war and peace for Congress to be heard. The president has given them a roadmap to follow. They can take that or they can come up with something else, but they should not take a pass on this important issue.
So that's the White House position, that they've given their suggestion to Congress, and now Congress can exercise their authority and do what they will. And it sounds like, since it's a Republican Congress, that they'll probably broaden the authority. And like I said, I'm going to show a couple of Republicans here. I already showed Bob Corker before I introduced this subtopic of the AUMF, but here's, of course, one of our favorite Republicans on Liberal Viewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup, at least in terms of being entertainingly extremist in a lot of ways, I guess, on foreign policy. Senator John McCain is who I'm talking about. And John McCain was over on, let me make sure I got this correctly. Oh, yeah, he was on NBC's Meet the Press talking to Chuck Todd, basically about how he wants broader authority in the AUMF. Big surprise over in this clip.
Are you going to be one of those proposing for broader authority for the president in the resolution as it gets debated?
I think we should not restrain the President of the United States. The Congress has the power of the purse. If we don't like what the Commander-in-Chief is doing, we can cut off his funds for doing so. But to restrain him in our authorization of him taking military action, I think, frankly, is unconstitutional and eventually leads to 535 commanders-in-chief.
Let me ask you.
So I guess on this topic, at least, they want the president or the executive branch to lead in foreign policy. A little later, I'll be showing you a clip of Speaker of the House John Boehner saying that shouldn't be a consideration when it comes to inviting the Prime Minister of Israel to the United States a couple weeks before the Israeli election. But I want to get to this other Republican talking about the authorization for use of military force. And this is a guy who I hadn't heard of before. He just started in the Congress. He's a former Navy SEAL, and actually he seemed pretty slick, because at the beginning he sounds really reasonable, but by the end you kind of realize that he wants much broader authority and is saying that Obama isn't, basically hawkish enough in his request for use of authorization to use military force. I think his name is, Representative Ryan Zinke, and he's talking to CNN State of the Union temporary host Jim Acosta over, let me make sure I get this right, in this clip.
Back to that interview that we just had with Leon Panetta, Congressman Zinke. You just got to Congress. You're a retired Navy SEAL. And one of the things that Leon Panetta said is that the greatest national security threat to the United States is not ISIS, it's not Al-Qaeda, it's Washington. What do you think so far?
Well, 3 days in, a lot of what he says is truthful. We're too bureaucratic, polarized. And I think the authorization is probably, a good look at that. Is what does the authorization mean? We're going to have hearings in Congress, and I think the president was right to ask Congress. But at the end of the day, what does it mean? I think Americans want the truth. When you embed troops, and air operations alone is not going to degrade or destroy ISIS. That's clear. But when you embed special operations troops, you're not going to sprinkle, and it's not going to be over the horizon. They're going to be up front. That means you have to make sure they have the right equipment, right training, right rules of engagement to win decisively on the field of battle. And you're not going to embed one or two special operations folks and selected units. That package will require medevac. What if our guys get injured? What if we need a quick reaction force? Right. So the footprint's going to be larger than I think the administration
and Congressman, you've got an op-ed in the Washington Times. We'll put it up on screen, and it says, I look at President Obama's proposal, and all I see is an outline of what our troops are not allowed to do. Congress should not be asked to put restrictions on the military. When the U.S. does go to war, we go to war to win. It is time the president stops listening to political pollsters and finally develop a plan to win. I want to...
So yeah, when you look at what he said in that op-ed, he doesn't sound quite as reasonable. At the beginning, he sounded almost like a reasonable person. Maybe he hasn't been in Washington long enough, I guess. But the next clip I want to show is actually from Fox News Sunday, where they had an exclusive interview with the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, and he also represents this Republican idea that what the president isn't asking for enough authority to fulfill the mission, I guess. But then Chris Wallace, the host of Fox News Sunday, tries to pin him down, saying that he would vote for and be in favor of, extensive ground troops, which is something, I can't remember, what is it, extended ground combat forces, or I can't remember the exact phrase that Obama proposed that would be prohibited. It's like extended use of ground combat forces, something like that. And John Boehner won't admit that he's in favor of the use of extended ground troops, but he still is very critical of President Obama's too narrow authority over in this clip.
President Obama is now asking Congress for authorization to fight ISIS. You have said that his bill that he sent up is too restrictive. Do you support giving the president authority to launch a full-scale ground war, U.S. ground troops in Iraq and Syria against ISIS? Do you think that he should at least be given that authorization?
The president is asking for less authority than he has today under previous authorizations. I don't think that's smart. We need a robust strategy to take on ISIL. No one has seen one from this White House yet. In addition to a robust strategy, I think we need to have a robust authorization. And I don't believe that what the president sent here gives him the flexibility or the authority to take on this enemy and to win. And so I look at the submission by the president as the beginning of the process. We're going to have exhaustive hearings in the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Intelligence Committee, the Armed Services Committee. And we're going to have bipartisan discussions about how we strengthen this authorization.
Do you think he should have the power to launch a full-scale ground war in that part of the world? Would you vote for that?
Chris, my first vote in the Congress was authorizing George Herbert Walker Bush to drive Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. My first vote in the Congress. And I've always believed that we should give the authority to the president to win the battles that we need to win. And I don't believe that the authorization the president asked for will give him the tools he needs to defeat ISIL. You know, he says, well, the threat is being diminished. Well, the fact is, ISIL continues to gain new territory.
So, as you saw there, the Speaker of the House pretty much dodged the question about whether he endorses the use of large amounts of ground combat forces. He just kept bringing it back to his criticism of President Obama without really answering Chris Wallace's question. And you have to give Fox News host Chris Wallace a little credit. I think there was even one more follow-up I didn't show on the use of ground forces there. And you know, I said it was pretty much a split between Republicans and Democrats on whether it was too narrow or too broad. I am going to show a Democrat who was over on NBC's Meet the Press. This is Senator Jack Keane, who did think that in some ways he wanted to have a narrow authorization in terms of the use of ground troops, but he was a little leery about this 3-year time limit that President Obama has put in there, and so I guess he is sort of on both sides of it, or he wanted broader in terms of the time limit, but did want narrowing in terms of ground troops, and I will talk about that a little more if you see that clip here.
With him. We're talking about Syria. He brought it up. The Syria strategy, you heard Richard's reporting on Iraq, but the Syria strategy is something everybody agrees, nobody quite knows what it is. Are you going to support a resolution giving the president more authority to combat ISIS in Iraq and Syria without knowing what his Syria strategy is?
Well, the resolution is based upon the immediate threat of ISIL against the United States. They're holding territory in Iraq against our regional neighbors. It's an international effort. We have the Jordanians flying with us. We have the UAE with us, etc. And we have to, I think, concentrate on the most immediate threat. That threat is ISIL in both Syria and in Iraq. And that's what the authority is requested for.
You don't think you have to outline of how okay, you get rid of ISIS, that's fine. Something will replace it in Syria that's probably not going to be friendly to the United States.
What we're trying to do, and this is very challenging, is to develop an alternative to the radical jihadists in Syria, and that is the Free Syrian Army. We're beginning to train them. We've authorized the training. It's going to take time. We're going to have to build it. We're going to have to introduce it onto the ground. We're going to have to effectively protect it. And hopefully that will be the nucleus for moderate forces to begin to turn the tide in Syria. It's going to take a much longer time. Relatively speaking,
you think 3 years, then it should be longer. Do you think 3 years is too short a time?
Oh, I think the resolution for 3 years, the time limit, is not appropriate, where we don't want to send a signal to the world that we're there for just so many years. Unfortunately, this battle is going to take a long time. It's a battle, and you pointed out quite rightly, based upon Richard's reporting, is that some of the fundamental issues are not operational, tactical, military, they're political. Right. The engagement of the Sunnis, the allocation of resources within Iraq. Even when you get into Syria, what is this political opposition going to look like? Not so much what kind of tactical units we're going to have on the ground. So this is not months. I think we'd be better off having a resolution that did not have a specific time limit. I do think, though, it does make sense to indicate very very strongly that our engagement would be limited in terms of American military personnel. And that, I think, is included within the resolution.
Let me ask.
So, yeah, like I said, there, Democratic Senator Jack Keane is on both sides of the narrower, broader issue because he wants to have a narrow authorization of use of military force that, in terms of what personnel, meaning combat ground troops, can be used. But he doesn't like this 3-year time limit. And I actually think the 3-year time limit is a good idea because it gets you to whoever the next president is going to be, and that's kind of an important factor to consider if you're in Congress and want to know how much authority to give to the president. Who that president is gives you a little bit more confidence as to how that authority is going to be used, I guess. And I want to show one more clip here from Jack Keane that also kind of disappoints me. He's using talking points that I remember from the Bush administration to answer the question, why are we fighting? First he uses, I guess, what I think they call the Colin Powell rule, that, we broke it, so we have to fix it. And then he uses that old George W. Bush talking point that we have to fight them over there so we don't have to fight them over here. And then at the end he does talk a little bit about how we need to involve our allies, which is the one thing I kind of agree with over in... Wait.
Let me ask a question.
Islamic radicals streaming into Syria and Iraq.
Let me ask a question that I get a lot. Why is this our fight? At some point, there is this feeling like, you know what, we can't do it.
Well,
why is this our fight?
This became our fight in 2002, 2003, when we decided to preemptively take out the Iraqi government. I thought.
So you now, whether you agree with the Iraq War or not, you believe the United States government has a responsibility now to basically put the Middle East back together.
We have the consequences of that decision, which I oppose, and those consequences are destabilized countries in Iraq to a degree, Syria. A lot of this is flowing from that decision. We have to do this in our own self-interest. We're doing this to help countries, but ultimately it's about protecting ourselves. We don't want radicalized, well-trained individuals coming back from Iraq or Syria and attacking the United States. We don't want other countries that are our allies being subjected to this pressure. But the fight ultimately has to be theirs. And again, then the fight ultimately is as much about the politics of the situation as it is about operational technique and forces on the ground.
Whew, so finally he got to something I could agree with about the need for the allies to fight the war, and I guess that's why he wants limits on the use of U.S. ground combat forces, because this is not mainly a U.S. fight against ISIS. It has to be the moderate Sunni states to the extent they're moderate, and of course Iran also is a foe of ISIS because Iran is Shia and ISIS is Sunni. And one clip I'm not going to show you is this great report from Martha Raddatz. She went like undercover in Iran and talked to Iranian women and got sort of insider talk with locals, kind of like she did in Jordan. She did the same thing in Iran, and you can see the whole This Week with George Stephanopoulos episode using that link I put down in the video description. But I am going to show an ABC clip as the last clip on the ISIS issue. This is about the threat of ISIS to the U.S. homeland. It's a report from their ABC Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas. And you may remember last week I had this clip of, I think it was it Dana Bash from CNN State of the Union, misreferring to this assistant FBI counterterrorism guy whose name is Michael Steinbach as John Steinbeck. Well, he appears again in this Pierre Thomas report on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos this morning. The last clip about the ISIS issue over here.
Of Islamic radicals streaming into Syria and Iraq, now more than 20,000 strong, 3,400 from Western countries, including America. So many that the FBI now bluntly admits it's a struggle to track them all.
I don't know every person there, and I don't know everyone coming back. So it's not even close to being under control.
Authorities say the number of foreign fighters is now at a critical point, a clear and present danger.
The rate of foreign fighter travel that we've seen in recent years is unprecedented. It exceeds the rate of travel and travelers who went to Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Yemen, or Somalia at any point in the last 20 years.
The United Nations says the civil war in Syria has displaced more than 12 million people, creating a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions. And according to some U.S. officials, now a new potential national security challenge as well. About 400 Syrian refugees have already come to the U.S., and thousands more may follow. Screening them all, a daunting challenge.
You're talking about a country that's a failed state. All the data sets, the police, the intel services that would normally you would go and seek that information don't exist.
Some Republican lawmakers worry about terrorists hiding among the victims who've had their homes and lives destroyed.
This would be a federally sanctioned welcome party, if you will, to potential terrorists in the United States.
But some administration officials believe such concerns may be overstated and that mechanisms are in place to properly vet refugees.
We seek to bring people who are really the most vulnerable. And indeed, most of the refugees we bring are families. And it's a tradition that many Americans should be very proud of.
Syria, a hellhole of strife, forcing the U.S. to balance protecting national security with easing human misery. For this week, Pierre Thomas, ABC.
So that was a sort of extended clip about the threat from ISIS to the U.S. homeland, and there seemed to be some controversy. I mean, some of those things sounded like there was a threat, but then some of it sounded like it may be overblown, especially the threat from the refugees. But I'm not going to be predicting the future as to where threats are going to come from. But I do want to move on to this one quick clip, also having to do with, I guess, the Middle East, and some people say a terrorist threat. This is about the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, some people, Bibi Netanyahu, coming to the United States to talk to the Republican Congress. I think it's next month, and it's a couple weeks before the Israeli election, which is why Obama wouldn't want to talk to him in this time period, because he doesn't want to look like he's interfering with the Israeli election. But I guess Netanyahu doesn't really care if he's engaging in partisan politics in the United States. And anyway, so as I showed earlier, Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday had on exclusively the Republican Speaker of the House, John Boehner, and asked him about this partisan split and why he was turning U.S. foreign policy towards Israel into a partisan issue when it's supposed to be, or has long been, nonpartisan, which, as many of my viewers will probably agree, both Democrats and Republicans tend to be very pro-Israel. There are a few exceptions. I even made a video about that several years back about the, I think it was called Fox News Bias for Israel and Gaza conflict or something, and it actually talked about the general bias in the media more towards Israel, and there are a lot of reasons for that, and some of them are actually good reasons, and but I'm not going to go into all that. But I do want to show what Chris Wallace got out of John Boehner. First, he seemed to be saying that, you know, it's just Congress's right as has a right to hear this important viewpoint, but by the end he was kind of saying Obama isn't close enough to Netanyahu, which is why I did this, or not explicitly that, but anyway, you can see it for yourself over in this clip.
You've created quite a controversy by inviting Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to speak to a joint session of Congress without telling the White House. Now, everyone from Vice President Biden down to 12 congressional Democrats have said they are not going to attend. Haven't you taken one of the few bipartisan issues in this country, support for Israel, and turned it into a political football?
I have not. The fact is we had every right to do what we did. I wanted the Prime Minister to come here. There's a serious threat facing the world. And radical Islamic terrorists are not going to go away. The President devoted but a few words to it in the State of the Union address. And then when it comes to the threat of Iran having a nuclear weapon, these are important messages that the Congress needs to hear and the American people need to hear. And I believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu is the perfect person to deliver the message of how serious this threat is.
But when you talked with Ron Dermer about inviting Netanyahu, you told him specifically not to tell the White House. Why would you do that, sir?
Because I wanted to make sure that there was no interference. There's no secret here in Washington about the animosity that this White House has for Prime Minister Netanyahu. And I frankly didn't want them getting in the way and quashing what I thought was a real opportunity.
But
so that was kind of an admission at the end that was prompted by some good questioning by Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace. Like I said, he did some good questioning, although I also have to point out that once again, I think Fox News Sunday was Democrat-free in terms of their guests. They had their exclusive interview with John Boehner, and then, as I'll show in a couple of minutes, they had on the, I assume, Republican, I don't know, maybe he's to the right of the Republican Party, the Chief Justice of Alabama Supreme Court, Roy Moore. But before I get to that issue, I want to show one more clip from John Boehner's interview with Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday. This is about a split within the Republican Party about funding the Department of Homeland Security. The House has passed this bill to fund it only with these riders that try to stop President Obama from his immigration action, granting deferred action to a whole bunch of undocumented immigrants, what Republicans like to call executive amnesty. I don't know where they get, though I don't think John Boehner actually uses that phrase, but he does say some other things that are kind of silly over in this clip.
haven't you and House Republicans put the GOP in a box with funding for the Department of Homeland Security about to run out, and you are demanding changes to the president's executive action on immigration that Senate Republicans say they can't pass?
Chris, the Constitution makes it pretty clear that the House has to do its work and the Senate has to do theirs. The House has acted to fund the department and to stop the president's overreach when it comes to immigration and his executive orders. Remember, Chris, the president said 22 times that he did not have the authority to do what he eventually did. And the Congress just can't sit by and let the president defy the Constitution and defy his own oath of office. And so the House acted. Now it's time for the Senate to act.
But the Senate, sir, respectfully can't act. They have 54 votes. They don't have 60 votes. Republicans use the filibuster. Democrats are using it now. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell says this.
I think it's clear we can't go forward in the Senate unless you all have heard something I haven't. And so the next move, obviously, is up to the House.
McConnell is saying the House has to pass something new that they can actually get through the Senate.
Listen, Senator McConnell's doing a great job as the new majority leader. He's allowed over 20 amendments to the Keystone Pipeline bill. This is not like the Senate that we've seen over the last 4 years. The Senate Democrats are blocking the ability to even debate the bill. Senator McConnell's offered them the opportunity to offer amendments. It's their turn. That's the way the system works. That's the way the Constitution spells it out. And so the House has done its job. We've spoken. If the Senate doesn't like it, they'll have to produce something that fits their institution.
Well, so much for the Republicans being the governing party that can get things done now that they control both houses of Congress. I guess Speaker of the House John Boehner is still blaming the minority of Democrats in the Senate for not having the Department of Homeland Security funded. It's kind of somehow it doesn't seem like a credible argument to me. You can let me know what you think down in the comments section, but I want to move on to another kind of silly argument that has broken out over marriage equality. This is a federal judge in district court judge in Alabama has found the Alabama constitutional amendment defining marriage as between one man and one woman as a violation of equal protection, and has ordered first ordered the Attorney General in Alabama to make the state issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples, and then later actually expanded the order to probate judges. That was just on Thursday. That's sort of this technical legal thing, because there was actually sort of a defect in the order that... Anyway, first, before I get to that, I want to show how Bill Maher talked about the issue in his monologue on Friday night's Real Time, the joke he made about this issue and what's happening in Alabama and the definition of marriage in Alabama over in this clip.
Now, down in Alabama, they are having a big fight. Have you seen this about gay marriage? The federal court down there actually says it is legal. But to prevent that, get this, 28 counties in Alabama are refusing licenses, marriage licenses, to anybody. That's how important this is to them. They are traditionalists, boy. You got to give them that. They believe marriage is not just anything. It is defined strictly as a union between a man and his sister.
So yeah, that's kind of the joke take on what's happening in Alabama. But next I want to show reporter's take on it. This is ABC's Steve Osunsami gave a report on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos about what's going on in Alabama. And there's some quick clips from the Chief Justice of Alabama Supreme Court, Roy Moore, here. But I'm going to show some extended clips from Roy Moore because he was actually on Fox News Sunday. I don't know if it was exclusively, because I actually saw him interviewed earlier in the week on CNN's State of the Union. Was it Jake Tapper? I think it was Jake Tapper interviewed him. But anyway, here's the extended report on what's going on in Alabama on marriage equality generally in the nation, and the Supreme Court's upcoming April oral arguments and June decision, most likely, all described over in this clip.
In the fight over gay marriage in Alabama, the latest blow is from a federal court in Mobile, telling county judges to take down signs and start marrying gay couples.
We've waited 33 years for this.
Carrie Searcy and Kimberly McKean are at the center of the case. They sued the state when their son needed surgery after the hospital refused to recognize both of them as parents.
We needed that legal protection. It was never about marriage for us. It was all about protecting our family.
Same-sex marriage is now legal in more than 30 states. But when a federal judge sided with Searcy and McKean, striking down a gay marriage ban in Alabama, no one less than the Chief Justice of Alabama's Supreme Court stepped in the way.
Definition of marriage is between one man and one woman.
The famously anti-federal Chief Justice Roy Moore is still ordering county probate judges to refuse marriage licenses for gay couples, arguing that he and the county judges are not required to listen to the federal judge in Mobile.
Under federal law, federal courts can't mandate their decisions upon state courts.
One of the country's most famous constitutional law professors disagrees.
We have a supremacy clause in our Constitution. When federal law is in conflict with state law, federal law wins out.
The U.S. Supreme Court will decide the case in June, one of its justices showing her hand.
As more and more people came out and said, this is who I am, and the rest of us recognized that they are one of us.
But the fight in Alabama could continue even if the Supreme Court sides with gay couples. The resistance here to the federal government is strong. For This Week, Steve Osunsami, ABC News.
So speaking of the resistance to marriage equality being strong in Alabama, I want to show a couple clips from the Alabama Supreme Court Justice Roy Moore appearing on Fox News Sunday, and his arguments are just not really good legal arguments. Being a lawyer myself, especially the second clip I'm going to show, but even this first clip where he tries to argue that judges don't make law. I mean, they call it case law. I have like books and books full of judge-made law. That's basically his argument here in response to Chris Wallace, who does some pretty good questioning. Here's the first clip of Alabama Supreme Court Justice Roy Moore, who's trying to avoid complying with the injunctive relief given by the federal judge, finding that same-sex couples have to be issued marriage licenses in Alabama. Here's how Roy Moore is trying to avoid that in this clip.
Here's what President Obama said this week about this case and what he said about you. Here he is, sir.
When federal law is in conflict with state law, federal law wins out.
Was there anything you'd say to him?
I think that the courts at the federal level will have something to say to him.
Mr. Chief Justice, your reaction to President Obama's comments?
Well, I'd like to tell President Obama that he's entirely correct. Federal law does trump state law. But what this Harvard professor, who is President of the United States, does not understand is that a trial court's decision on the constitutionality of a federal question is just that. It's an opinion. It may be law of the case before her. It is not overturning the Alabama Constitution. Federal law is not made by judges. That's something very basic, something Speaker Boehner has just referred to about the constitutional violations of this president and the Supreme Court. We are seeing this. Those interpretations are not law. If they were, then the legislature would have no role. Legislators are to make law. Congress is to make law. The United States Supreme Court Constitution is law. So is the Alabama Constitution. We have a fundamental misunderstanding in our country that federal courts, by their mere utterance, make law. They do not make law, sir. They make law of the case applicable to the parties before them.
But, all right, this gets a lot into the weeds, and this isn't a law class. You heard the Chief Justice. I'm not a lawyer. But what if the U.S. Supreme Court hears the case in April and decides in June that there is a constitutional right to same-sex marriage? You have been, forgive me, a little fuzzy on this. You said at one point you would recuse yourself. What does that mean?
That means if a case comes before me and the Supreme Court has decided what marriage is, then that would control that case, but I would not be bound thereby. I could recuse or dissent, as a justice from Delaware did in the Dred Scott case in 1857. They ruled black people were property. Should a court today obey such a ruling that is completely contradictory of the Constitution? You know, Justice...
But I guess what I'm asking you is, I understand you'd be unhappy and you say you'd recuse yourself.
Sure.
But are you saying if the Supreme Court rules that Alabama does have to abide by the Supreme Court's ruling?
State courts are bound by the rulings of the United States Supreme Court. But just like Benjamin Curtis did, he said that when a strict interpretation of the Constitution, according to the fixed rules which govern the interpretation of laws, is abandoned and the theoretical opinions of individuals allowed to control its meaning, we have no longer a constitution. We're under a government of individual men who, for the time being, have the power to declare what the Constitution is according to their own views of what they think it ought to mean.
So that's actually a pretty good recitation by heart of the dissenter in the Dred Scott decision that said that slaves were property, or although the thing is, under the Constitution at that time, slaves were property. It took like the 13th, 14th Amendment to get rid of slaves being property, and so I guess, and then plus in this next answer he also talks about Plessy versus Ferguson, and that was the law of the land for a while. But well, I'll talk about that a little more after you see this next question from Chris Wallace, where, like I said, you have to give Chris Wallace credit for asking fairly hard or difficult questions. Here he actually brings up Justice Roy Moore's history with the Ten Commandments monument in Alabama, where he was actually found to have violated judicial ethics. And Chris Wallace actually brings it up over in this clip.
We just have time for one last question. This is not the first time that you have run up against the federal courts. Back in 2003, you ignored a Court of Appeals, U.S. Federal Court of Appeals ruling that you must remove a 2-ton granite monument of the Ten Commandments from the state capitol. At that point, sir, Alabama, a state ethics panel, said that you had to be removed from office because you had put yourself above the law. Aren't you doing the same thing now, sir?
I was obeying the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, which does not prohibit the acknowledgement of God. When federal courts start changing our Constitution by defining words that are not even there, like marriage, they're going to do the same thing with family in the future. When a word's not in the Constitution, clearly the powers of powers of the Supreme Court do not allow them to redefine words and seize power. The power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, or reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. This power over marriage, which came from God under our organic law, is not to be redefined by the United States Supreme Court or any federal court.
But they may do it. Chief Justice
Well, they may do it, but they may do wrongfully, just like they did in Dred Scott and Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, where they said that separate but equal was the policy of the United States.
I understand that, but when the Supreme Court rules, the Supreme Court rules. Chief Justice Moore, we're going to have to leave it there.
Now, actually, one of the reasons Plessy versus Ferguson was overruled by Brown versus Board of Education was some really good lawyering by the NAACP and Thurgood Marshall, who was the lawyer for the NAACP at that time, where they showed factually that separate but equal was inherently unequal, that they gathered all this information about the difference between the white schools and the black schools, and so they actually proved that Plessy versus Ferguson was factually wrong, that separate but equal wasn't on the ground equal. So that was one reason that Plessy versus Ferguson was overturned. And like I said, Dred Scott was actually probably a correct interpretation of the Constitution before the Civil War, and the 13th and 14th Amendment got rid of slavery and gave equal rights to everyone, born in the United States, even if they were at one time a slave. And anyway, I want to show one more clip on this. This is shows one of the probate judges whose job it is to actually issue marriage licenses, and this person seems a lot more reasonable and not going to listen to what Supreme Court Justice Roy Moore has to say, I guess. So this is a little bit of a hopeful sign that there are reasonable people in Alabama, which I'm sure there are. That this is a probate judge. His name is Stephen Reed. Over on This Week with George Stephanopoulos, though Jonathan Karl was filling in for George Stephanopoulos on ABC this morning here.
To make a decision. And, if you look at polls, though, in Alabama, of course, Alabama approved that ban on same-sex marriage back in 2006 with over 80% voting yes. And even now in Alabama, look at the latest poll, 59% say they oppose same-sex marriage. Aren't the people of Alabama essentially with Judge Moore on this? Does that bother you?
No, no, that doesn't bother me at all. I mean, we're a nation of laws, not of men, and so we're sworn to uphold an oath in the probate court, and that's what we do. We uphold the oath as it relates to the state constitution and the U.S. Constitution, and so we understand that we can't bring politics and personal feelings into decisions that we make day to day.
Have you felt?
So, like I said, even though I guess 80-something% of Alabamans voted for that constitutional amendment, and 59%, and that was 2006, and 59% of them still support a ban on marriage equality. I guess looking at that probate judge, Stephen Reed, it seems like there are still some reasonable people in Alabama. And, like I was saying when I started introducing this topic, at the beginning of the week, Supreme Court Justice of Alabama, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Alabama, Roy Moore, did actually have a point, because this federal judge had ordered the Attorney General of Alabama to issue these marriage licenses, but the Attorney General doesn't issue marriage licenses in Alabama. It's these probate judges, and they're part of the judiciary, which is what Roy Moore was trying to say, that these district courts don't have power over the state courts, but actually when probate judges issue marriage licenses, they're serving an executive function. And then, like I said, on Thursday, the federal judge added as a party to the litigation the probate judges, or at least one probate judge, so that makes the order doesn't have the technical defect that Chief Justice Roy Moore had a little bit of a point about at the beginning of the week. It didn't even exist by the end of the week. And anyway, I hope you enjoyed all those clips on the issue of marriage equality in Alabama. And the other point, I guess, before I leave it, that you should keep in mind is the fact that the Supreme Court is allowing same-sex couples to get married in Alabama means they're probably not going to overturn marriage equality with their ruling in June. I mean, you never know for sure, but it's really hard to take away people's marriages once you've given them their marriages. So they're not going to do anything that's going to upset marriage equality in Alabama or probably in just about any state. I want to show a couple quick clips. I haven't really covered what happened with Brian Williams and or about Jon Stewart leaving The Daily Show. I don't have a lot of clips on that, but I do have a couple quick clips that deal with the media. And first, I want to show a clip from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. This is his new rules at the end, where he talked about Brian Williams, and he said something that I think Jon Stewart on The Daily Show might have appreciated about the dumbing down of the news and soft news. And this is basically Bill Maher's point that Brian Williams didn't lose his credibility telling this tall tale about being shot at by Iraqi forces during the invasion of Iraq when he was on this helicopter, and that wasn't what lost his credibility. It was more the way he ran. You know, he was manager of the NBC Nightly News. And anyway, here's Bill Maher's take on that in this clip.
Brian Williams' lie about the helicopter? That didn't destroy his credibility with me. 10 years of wasting precious news time on bullshit stories about car chases and bears in a swimming pool and store clerks fighting back and returning soldiers surprising their kids at the big game and Powerball jackpots and that stupid fucking Spanish tomato fight. That's what destroyed his credibility with me. So I know what you're thinking. Who cares, Bill? Nobody watches broadcast news anyway. We get our news the modern way, from the video screen at the gas station. No, actually, over 9 million people watched Brian Williams every night, about 12 times more than CNN. Delivering the news is a sacred responsibility. It's telling us the important things we need to know. It shouldn't be a race to the bottom over who can attract more eyeballs with titillation. If it is, let's just get it over with and show porn in the last segment. And we're almost there. The new thing is just to show a YouTube clip that's gone viral. It's like the news brought to you by your biggest stoner friend.
Well, I don't know if it got that bad, but the point that Bill Maher made about the nightly news broadcast getting so much more viewership than CNN, well, that's true. And it's also true of Fox News. That's one of the things that most people don't think about. Fox News always says it's #1 in cable news, but it gets like 1 million at its like top primetime viewership. And if you compare it to CBS, NBC, and ABC's nightly news, which is like 22 minutes of news, somewhere around 6 p.m., they still get like 9 million, 10 million. Each of those broadcasts gets many more views than even the Fox News channel. Fox News is #1 in cable news compared to CNN and MSNBC, but doesn't beat out, that 22 minutes that I guess really old people still watch. I haven't watched it in many years. And then the next clip I want to show on the media is about Jon Stewart leaving. A lot of people talked about that. I didn't choose any of these other clips, but I do want to show this one discussion on NBC's Meet the Press. It's Chuck Todd and former senior advisor to President Obama, David Axelrod, talking about the difference between where liberals are strong, like Jon Stewart, in terms of satire, and then where conservatives are strong in the media over in this clip.
Welcome back. Big news affecting both politics and showbiz this week. Jon Stewart announcing he's stepping down from The Daily Show after 17 years. I want to bring in the panel on this. And Joe and Axe, I want you guys to deal with this first. Liberals are just in mourning, Mr. Axelrod, about losing Stewart. And it was a reminder to me that when you think about it, political satire dominated by liberals right now. Stewart, Oliver, Colbert, throw in Bill Maher. Liberal conservative talk radio, it's, you know, Limbaugh, Mark Levin, Hugh Hewitt. Liberals can't succeed on radio, and conservatives aren't succeeding in political satire.
Well, you know, Chuck,
why?
there's a long history of this. You go back to the beginning of radio and Father Coughlin, and right-wing radio has always been populist. It's always had huge audiences. There hasn't been a corollary on the left, but satire goes to, I think, kind of a more elite audience, and therefore it
the
more.
elites, it's the liberals, it's the, you know, the traveling salesman. Is it, what's your...
So that's kind of an interesting question as to why it is that satire seems to be more successful for liberals and the liberal elite, while talk radio is more successful for conservatives, and both sides have problems breaking into the domain of the other. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section as to why that is. And I want to show one more quick clip before I end the show. This is a topic last year, like several weeks, this was a main topic, and then it sort of fell off the radar. It's the scandal at the Veterans Administration hospitals, where people were on these long waiting lists, and there have also been some scandals with veterans in the call centers. And anyway, over on NBC's Meet the Press, Chuck Todd had on the new Secretary of Veterans Affairs, or hopefully I have that title correctly. I'm sure it'll be flashed on the screen while you watch this clip, where he talks about how he's really brought accountability to his department. At least he has some good talking points on it. I don't know what the facts are behind it, but he says like 900 people have been fired, and he goes into details about why many of them have been fired, with a follow-up question from Chuck Todd over in this clip.
Fundamental changes in the department. In terms of leadership, we've held accountable about 900 employees who are no longer with us, that were with us before I became secretary.
What does held accountable mean? Have you fired them?
900 people have been fired since I became secretary.
All right. So.
We've got 60 people that we've fired who have manipulated wait times. We've got about 100 senior leaders who are under investigation now, whose performance reviews have been deferred until we get feedback from the IG and Department of Justice. So we're holding people accountable.
You know, look, we're 9.
So we talked about 90 people who were fired for on the wait times, and another 100 people, supervisors, who were under review, but that still leaves like 710 people, or even 800 people, or 840 people who he hasn't really said what happened to them. But that's what I meant in terms of it being kind of like talking points, but it kind of sounded good anyway, and it was an update, the only place I saw any update on that in a long time, so I thought I would put that, at least on the Sunday morning shows, as the last clip for my Sunday clip roundup. I hope you appreciated the clips I picked out for you. I have to let you know, next Sunday I will probably have to do a delayed show. I think it'll probably be like 11 a.m. or even noon on Monday before I can broadcast the show. I'll still try to broadcast it live. I have this mandatory ACLU orientation for grassroots organizer kind of things, that and it's going to be pretty much all day next Sunday, so I will be delaying the show until Monday next week. I know for a lot of the people who watch it this time, that'll make it impossible, but then so I'll have like a different set of viewers, but some of you I know will make the adjustment and still show up Monday around noon Pacific time, maybe 11 a.m., depending on how long it takes me to put it all together after I do this all-day thing on Sunday for the ACLU. But see, I'm wearing my ACLU t-shirt just to let you know that I do have some other things that take up my time, and that's one of the reasons my video was a little delayed. I'm sorry about that. It was supposed to be released this week, and then there was kind of a copyright problem with one of the clips, but I have released a draft that's like 21.5 minutes long to my Patreon patrons, and then hopefully I'll be able to edit it down to at least under 20 minutes by cutting some of the clips down, maybe even close to 15. I don't know exactly how good a job of editing I'll be able to do by Thursday morning, but it will definitely be released publicly on Thursday, February 19th at 9 a.m. Pacific, whatever state it's in at that point. And if you want to see the draft, you just have to join my Patreon patrons and pledge that a pledge you don't even have to pay until the beginning of March, and then I will send you a link to the unlisted video draft of if anybody cares. That's how you get access to it, and I actually appreciate any feedback I can get from my viewers before it's released, because I always learn a lot from the comments I get when it gets publicly released, and I'd really like to incorporate some of that into draft versions so I make better, clearer arguments for my audience. And anyway, like I said, I hope you enjoyed the clips I picked out for you, and it left you a little bit more informed about what it is the corporate media in the United States thinks is important. And I will be doing this show again for the foreseeable future. Although last week's show, if you look at it, you'll see all the ads are gone because inexplicably it got unmonetized by YouTube, not by a copyright claim, but with no notice or reason, it just like became unmonetized. I don't know why, and that's another reason that I appreciate it when people join my Patreon patrons, or even if you go over to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/LiberalViewer. There, if you're in 4 special countries, I think it's United States, Mexico, Japan, and Australia. If you're in one of those countries, you can make a direct donation to my channel, so I don't have to depend so much on the vagaries of whether YouTube wants to monetize my videos and give me revenue. Like I said, I'm just trying to get it back up to the point where I make at least a minimum wage for the time I put into picking out all these clips and processing them and broadcasting them for you. So I appreciate all of my patrons who have signed up already, and people who give me those direct donations on the Support Liberal Viewer button that's on my YouTube channel. So thanks again for joining me. I think I peaked well over 100 at one point, so I appreciate my live viewers, my recorded viewers, and I guess I'll be seeing all of you as soon as possible around the internet.